let me read you a little story. This is a scene from my book, The Great Tree of Avalon. It's the first book in that trilogy. Some of you know that this trilogy really I view as the capstone of my Merlin saga, because this is the story that is about all of the worlds that Merlin created and lived in, including Earth, but most importantly, the world that is called the Great Tree of Avalon, which is itself a world inside a tree. And while you can't see it here, you can when you look at the map, which I had the great fun of drawing. You can see that the world has root realms that are all built around an individual element, and also that you have, in addition, you have worlds inside the trunk of the tree here that are hidden, mysterious realms, some dark and dangerous and deeply, deeply threatening, and others wondrous and luminous and amazing, none of which have been explored before. And then that is the journey of the middle volume. And then in the final volume of the Great Tree of Avalon trilogy, you will follow the branches of this tree, branches which it turns out are pathways to the stars. So all of that awaits in Merlin's world, Avalon, the great tree, which connects all other worlds, mortal and spiritual. But in this book, I'm going to just choose one little scene, which is an opportunity to introduce you to the lead character, a young fellow named Tamlin, who is a wandering wilderness guide, somebody who just is as light on the land as any human being could be, although he's filled with angst and uncertainty about what his life really ought to be about. At this point, though, he takes jobs leading people across the root realms of Avalon, dipping into portals in the wood route and emerging somewhere in the water route segment, or riding on the back of great creatures, or finding himself in the process. In this moment, though, he just happens along. He sleeps in dung piles. He totally enjoys listening to a good bard tell a story or sing a song, if he's lucky enough to be in a village where that's happening. But he has to take whatever business he can get as a guide, and he agrees to guide a cantankerous priestess, plus her two companions, a young apprentice priestess named Ellie, who those of you who have read this book know has her own amazing journey, both behind and ahead, and an ancient, very grumpy sprite named Newick, who expresses himself through colors. His skin changes colors, and he also speaks, but you can very much tell what mood he's in by the color of his skin. Well, I should one more thing add, which is, I guess, a spoiler, but spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you anyway. Tamlin, our wilderness guide, has no idea at all that he is either the lost true heir of Merlin, the great wizard, who seems to have vanished from this world. Nobody knows quite why. Or the much feared person who is called the child of the dark prophecy. Tamlin will find out which he is in this book, The Great Tree of Avalon. Book 1, which is also, I should say, known as Book 9 of the full Merlin saga. So let me now introduce you to one scene in Book 1. The priestess crashed through the tangled forest, ignoring all of Tamlin's advice. Tripping on branches and mossy stones, one branch scratched her on the cheek. Angrily, she swore, "By the beard of Merlin! Some guide you are! Do you have any idea at all how to get through this cursed jungle?" "Yes," answered Tamlin with a sigh. "Listen to it. Just listen." "Are you mad?" the priestess huffed. She swatted a maple leaf out of her face. "We need to see better, not hear better." "Wrong." Tamlin stepped over to her, ducking under the hawthorn branch. "Trees and plants have their own languages, just like the fairies, or," he swallowed, remembering, "the deer. To learn their ways, it is more important to listen than to speak. If you want to find the deepest forest, and you listen well enough, the forest itself will tell you." Despite herself, young Ellie felt touched by her words. She whispered to Newick, "You know, even an oaf like him knows more than she does." The old sprite merely scowled and turned a deep shade of angry purple. "That is not saying much." "Here," suggested Tamlin, pulling a tangle of vines off the priestess's leg. "Let me show you." He moved ahead into the forest, stretching out his senses. He felt the slope and texture of the ground under his feet, noted the types and heights of the trees. He smelled the changing aromas of resins or fruit or a fox's den. And above all, he listened to the swish and clatter of branches, to the undulating whisper of the wind, to the footsteps of scurrying animals, the cries of birds on the wing, and so much more. This truly is more than a forest, he thought, as his bare feet padded over some springy bluish moss. This is a world as complex and created with connections beyond anything I can know, just like the world of Avalon. He drew a full breath of the richly scented air, wondering if this land too had been touched by the same drought that had struck the rest of Stone Root. Was it possible that this most lush and vibrant forest was actually more dry, its colors more faded than usual? In a moment's time, he picked up the winding trail of an elk. Despite his many bruises, he felt a sudden, intense urge to run along it, to stretch his legs and bound. But he made himself ignore the urge. This was a time to walk on human feet, because he was a guide. The trail led them to higher ground. The branches grew thinner. The forest around them seemed to pull back, and the ground grew firmer. Soon the scent of honey fern, thick and sweet, wafted over them. They came to a glade where long grasses tickled the trunks of some mountain ash trees, still laden with berries. Near the back of the glade stood one old cherry tree, whose trunk bent with the weight of many seasons. Tamlin stretched his sore back. "Should we take a brief stop here, just for a rest, or maybe a bite to eat?" The sprite, always eager for a meal, promptly agreed. So did Ellie. Still sulking after her humiliation, the priestess said nothing. They all sat and ate some berries, still juicy if quite tart, and some spicy pepper root. But Tamlin shifted constantly. With all of his bruises and cuts, he couldn't find a comfortable sitting position, so he got up and walked around a bit. Soon he noticed an odd bulge in the cherry tree. It looked like a gnarled burl, although he'd never seen a burl with so many interesting knobs and folds. He strode over to take a closer look. Laying his hand on the cherry's rutted bark just above the burl, he peered closely. Suddenly, he jumped backward. The burl and the tree around it had moved. Tamlin watched, his eyes wide. The burl swelled larger, bulging outward like the skin on a pot of heated milk. Gradually, a narrow ridge formed down the middle. To either side, clefts sank into the bark, and deep within them, reddish sparks gleamed. And near the bottom of the shape, a thin line appeared, lengthening and drooping to one side. A face, he said in amazement. It's a face. Excuse me. Quick sip of water. Helps renew that voice that we were talking about. A face, he said in amazement. It's a face. The thin line of the mouth opened slightly, showing wrinkled green lips. Not so smooth a face as yours, young man, but good enough for me, the spirit of an old tree. The voice crackled and popped like cherry branches in a fire. Tamwin looked around as the others at the others over by the ash trees, tempted to show them what he'd found. But Ellie and Newick had wandered off, while the priestess had finally stretched out on the grass to take a nap. Meanwhile, a thick gray mist was moving over them, covering every branch and tree and the priestess like an airy blanket. It almost seemed to be coming from the mountain ash trees, and it was moving toward Tamwin. Turning back to the cherry, he said, "You must be very old." The mouth turned up a bit and released a sound like scraping bark. "Buds and blossoms, young man. Older than you, I suppose, but not very old at all. Compared to the Great Tree of Avalon, I am barely a sapling. Not old enough to be wise, just enough to be sad." Tamwin bent closer. Resting his weary body, he leaned against the trunk, careful to avoid the face. "Sad, Master Tree Spirit? May I ask why?" The old tree's branches shrugged, and its leaves rustled in a sigh. "Because, young man, in all my seasons, the winter has always been followed by the spring. But now, I'm afraid, the spring may never come." Never come? He felt suddenly afraid and fought back a yawn. "Tell me why. Do you not yet know, young man?" Tamwin mysteriously nodded and yawned once again. "Know what?" The branches stirred uneasily. "A butterfly free is alive forever, but a butterfly caught is as dead as a mote of dust." I still don't understand." "Then listen, young man." The reddish eyes glowed. "There is, right now, in this very forest, a threat to all." Tamwin felt suddenly more dizzy than tired. He dropped to one knee, even as the gray mist flowed over him. He never heard the rest of the tree spirit's words, just as he never heard his own body collapse on the ground. And there we are.